Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you very much for joining us today for what promises to be an exciting and informative talk about Armenia, a host country. This is a talk that we offer to the new members of our community at the beginning of every academic year, so that they can familiarize themselves with the country that probably this time last year they didn't know much about before the children applied to UWC and were selected to be sent to UWC Dilijan. I personally have been living in Dilijan a little more than 2 years, and I have found this country to be extremely hospitable and welcoming. I also feel very safe here, and I'm here with my family, and we've had a wonderful 2 years here so far. We are very pleased to welcome Dr. Artak Ayunts today, who is our speaker. And regarding the format of today's talk, Artak will talk about Armenia, its culture and its history, and the impact of the history on today's situation for about 20 minutes. And then we will have an opportunity to ask him some questions. So if you already have some questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A section. Or if you have any questions arising during his talk, please do the same, and we'll come to these questions at the end of Artak's talk. So I would just like to briefly introduce today's speaker. So Artak is currently working at the UN as a peace development advisor. He is a peace researcher and a conflict practitioner with 25 years of experience in conflictology and peace building. His main expertise includes ethno-political conflicts, conflict analysis and resolution, conflict transformation, and peace building. During the last several years, he has taught at UWC Dilijan, worked with different international and national NGOs in the field of peace building over Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Armenia-Turkey normalization, conflicts in Ukraine and in Libya. In the past, he taught courses on peace studies and conflict transformation at Yerevan State University. He is also focused on peace education, delivering training on peace and conflict transformation. Artak is the author of several articles and academic publications on the issues of conflict and peace. Thank you very much, Artak, for joining us today, for finding the time to bring Armenia closer to the new parents and the families of the new students that we have just welcomed. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for introduction. First of all, apologies for being a little bit late. I was not expecting my other meeting to last as long as it actually lasted, but it was an important discussion on peace building opportunities for Armenia in the light of these recent developments, and I was moderating it, so I could not leave the room earlier. Again, apologies, but I hope I will compensate, and I'm happy to stay longer if necessary than the 1 hour. Adam already introduced me, but maybe also a few words from my side, because I also am still involved with Dilijan, UWC Dilijan. But in the past, I was even more directly involved because I was teaching a course on global politics. And I'm saying this just to let everyone know that I have also some knowledge and understanding how the school functions, how it operates, what are the subjects there. And I had the privilege also to communicate, obviously, with the students as being a mentor for a group of students. So I know how it inside out, in a way, the school, obviously the community also. But I'm also currently engaged in practical work, peace building, because most of the time people ask, so what is peace building? What do you do? It is hard to explain that, for instance, we are doing research, we are teaching, we are training, etc. But when it comes to practical work and bringing change on the ground, this is what, for instance, the United Nations is trying to do these days, or other international actors are doing, or have been doing, or will be doing. CSOs will be doing. Some of the students, the young people, that it's also under my radar as being employed in the UN, working with the young people who are eager to translate their knowledge and understanding of the theory into practice. And that's what I was trying also to do in UWC Dilijan. Although the curriculum is very strict. There are not many opportunities to deviate a little bit from this academic part of the teaching and studying. But extracurricular activities that I was contributing to, or some other events, I was happily sharing the knowledge and understanding of the context in Armenia, and then obviously trying to encourage students to become agents of change when it comes to peace and building peace, one of the core missions of the UWC across the world, and the foundations of UWC, in fact. So I'll stop there in terms of this introduction, and then I'll immediately switch into the more the content of today's meeting or discussion. Adam already mentioned that I will speak about the Armenian history, culture, and politics, but I want to focus mostly on the modern day issues and challenges that Armenian society and Armenian government, everyone living in Armenia, is facing. Obviously, making some references to the history and culture of Armenia. So currently, Armenia is in a very delicate process of peacemaking in the region. And the agreements that most of you probably heard about on August 8, that the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan were able to agree in Washington, D.C., mediated by President Trump, were significant breakthrough in the peace process in Armenia, because for the last 34 years, Armenia was engulfed in conflict and war and violence with its neighbor Azerbaijan. And there were several cycles of escalation and violence of war. The last, we can recall the events of 2023, Azerbaijani offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh, forcing the entire population to leave their homes and become refugees, mostly in Armenia. So that was the last element of wider scale violence. But even before that, and slightly also after that, there were also some instances of skirmishes, of border issues between the two countries. And they were, at the same time, they were also, the two countries were negotiating the peace agreement. So eventually what happened on August 8, that the both leaders committed to signing the peace agreement as soon as possible. So it was not a peace agreement that was signed between them, it was initialing the peace agreement, the draft text of which is already public and has already been shared, indicating that the two parties have already agreed around this text, which everybody can familiarize themselves with, and they can find some very basic principles of laying the foundations of peace, but also some practical steps that the two countries are committing reciprocally to conduct when it comes to building peace and signing the peace agreement. So that was a big achievement on the Armenian side. The Armenian government is proud to present it as a big achievement, a breakthrough. If you listen to the senior officials, including the prime ministers, others, they believe that the peace has been established already between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, there are others who criticize this approach and say that there is a long way to build peace, and by signing or initialing even the peace agreement, it is hard to change the entire history of conflict, of the narratives, conflictual narratives, of stereotypes, of prejudices, of history that was taught also in the public schools and other educational institutions in Armenia and Azerbaijan in a matter of signing of the agreement, or in a matter of days or weeks, so it will take years. So, but you have to start from somewhere. And I believe that with more peaceful means and applying peaceful mechanisms in dealing with conflicts, obviously is the solution. And we have gone through many cycles of violence and loss and defeat. And unfortunately, the last episodes in 2020 and 2023 that took lives of thousands of Armenians and also made hundreds of thousands, refugees, hundreds of thousands of them. It's still there, it's still fresh in the memories of people. Society is largely traumatized. It is difficult to come to terms with the loss of territory, of lives of people. But at the same time, when you look even in the public opinion polls, survey results, you see that people do want peace. And peace is something that is also naturally desired by anyone. It's difficult to find someone who will say they don't want peace. The question then there is, what peace are you expecting to have? So what is is it going to be just peace? Is it going to satisfy your needs? is it going to address some of the grievances that you had in the past with your neighboring country? So there are many, many layers of building peace, but the foundation of the peace agreement, which will prevent future episodes, hopefully, prevent future episodes of violence and conflict, and let the people to start realizing the benefits of peace in terms of improving their livelihoods, in terms of being able to send their students to school rather than to army, in terms of other areas of life when people are trying to build and develop their future rather than in the context of conflict and violence and uncertainty, which also triggers emigration from Armenia. And since early days of 1990s, since early days of independence, there have been several cycles of immigration from Armenia because of the uncertainty, because of the lack of peace, and because of the conditions that people were not sure. Some of them are still not sure. It's not a matter. Again, I have to refer, using every opportunity to mention that it is not peace that already been reached, but this is the direction where the Armenian state of Armenia and the Armenian people are moving forward. And this is also indicated in some of the public opinion polls that people do want peace. Of course, when it comes to the question at what cost, whether it will be justice, whether some of the humanitarian issues that are still remain between Armenia and Azerbaijan will be dealt with. So these are open questions, and I think everybody understands this. But again, the approach is that let's start talking rather than shooting at each other, and then find ways to also the remaining issues. And one of the remaining issues for Armenia and Armenian society is the fate of the Armenian prisoners, Armenian detainees that are still kept in Azerbaijan, and also hundreds of others who are considered missing from the wars of 2020, 2023, even earlier days from 1990. And these families also want answers. These families also to find the relatives that they are missing. There is no information for them. And on a humanitarian level, this is a huge issue. And the government is committed also to addressing this issue, what they announced publicly. They don't say much about this when it comes to when they are asked about the negotiation process, but they ensure the public that this is one of the main agenda points that they're discussing with their Azerbaijani counterpart. But since the topic is so sensitive, it is not easy for them to reach out to the public openly. And we have seen in the past 5 years, during the past 5 years, that there have been many others that were that the government was able to bring them back, and hopefully this issue will also be dealt with. But there are also other issues, territorial issues still remaining. There is an issue of enclaves between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There are also issue of the border delimitation and demarcation. You probably know, or if you don't know, it is important to also to raise this, also the expectations of the hope, also for particularly in Tavush region where Dilijan is based. There is a small section of border that has been delimited and demarcated between Armenia and Azerbaijan. A wall has been erected there. If you go to that village of Kirans, which is not far from Dilijan, in fact, I mean the border line is far, but it's like relatively speaking, it's close to Dilijan than to Yerevan. If you travel there, and I encourage also students or the faculty in Dilijan, UWC, to visit there to see how this demarcation was conducted on the ground. What do the people living in that village where the fence is now going just next to the highway, and what is the feeling of security, of physical security, but also human security that has been created thanks to this delimitation work. And for your information also, for instance, it used to be a very small village, only 85 families living there, or 85 or up to 100 houses there. At present, there is another 50 houses that the villagers are building. So this is a clear example of the hope for future. That they are certain that there is some security has been guaranteed already, at least for them in that small community. Because when it is one thing when there is no border, and there can be incursions, there can be encroachments, there can be interference, interactions, etc. But when you establish the border, and there are border guards, not the army, but border guards protecting the civilians and providing another level of security, I think that is pretty much of an achievement. in the current state of affairs between the two countries. Also, another important element that many others in other regions, because we also traveled in different regions of Armenia, in the south in particular, that was also very contentious and still is contentious when it comes to opening the routes and communications between the two countries. They also want, they raise this question to against the vis-a-vis the officials or UN or others. We also want our borders to be demarcated so that we also feel the security ourselves, because they also have issues with their farming land, with their pastures, with their agricultural land that they want to use, which is next door to Azerbaijani military positions. Whereas if we secure the border, it will increase the level of security. So I just immediately jump into some of the issues of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. But historically, Armenia has also had very tense relations with the other neighbor on the west, which is Turkey. The border, Turkish side has closed the border with Armenia, the ground border with Armenia since 1993 as a response to Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in the early years of the war in 1993. And until now, that border remains closed and there is no diplomatic relations between the two countries. So we are also hopeful that in the short-term future, Turkey will also open the ground border for Armenia to be able to engage in trade and reach out other markets, which will be an important matter for the increasing of the GDP, economic lives of people, and also supporting the livelihoods of people, and so many other on so many other levels. Of course, taking into account the sensitivities of the new border, of the new flow of trade between the two countries, and so on and so forth. But I'm trying to say that it's also moving on that direction in a positive way. Hopefully, that the situation will also evolve there in a peaceful way. With our other two neighbors in the north with Georgia and in the south with Iran, Armenia has had very friendly relationships since the early days of independence. These two countries are major partners of Armenia when it comes to trade, economy, when it comes also to security, security in a wider concept, not only physical security, but like, for instance, food security or human security and many, many other things, because Georgia is the route to reach European markets for Armenia, to trade and export route. And Iran obviously is a connecting link with Asian markets, with India and China and other places. And there are discussions right now going on between India, Iran, and Armenian officials of opening the north-south corridor, which will connect India through Iran and Armenia and Georgia and reach out to the other markets. Another discussion that is ongoing in these peace negotiations also is the opportunity to open the borders between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the south, in Syunik, which will also provide opportunity for Armenia to use alternative roads to enhance its development. But this is also a very contentious item because there are different approaches in terms of when it comes to the modality of opening that, of functioning of that road, which Armenia and Azerbaijan are negotiating. And by the way, one of the achievements of August 8 agreements in Washington this year was about establishing this route, the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, labeled as TRIP, which can connect not only Azerbaijan with its own territory of Nakhichevan through Armenia, but also provide Armenia opportunities to trade with, to have railway connection with Russia, with Iran, with Turkey, with Azerbaijan, so on and so forth. So there are many things yet to be discussed and negotiated between the two countries, but the foundations of this have already been laid, and hopefully at some point in future there will be also a possibility to sign the peace agreement. The last impediment that still remains for signing the peace agreement is raised by Azerbaijan, because they think that in Armenian constitution there are still references to there are some territorial claims vis-a-vis Azerbaijan, and they have requested that Armenia makes amendments in this constitution. But even without that, Armenian government was committed to conduct to implement the constitutional amendments, and we have been informed, people in Armenia, that the government is committed to implement the constitutional amendments. We don't know what it will look like, and it has to go to referendum, but sometime next year. Next year we also have national elections for the parliament, and this will be a crucial year for Armenia. So I just talked about a few elements of negotiations and history, a little bit of history between Armenia, Azerbaijan, Armenia-Turkey, and its neighbors, and current state of affairs, and mostly providing an insight on how this can develop in the future, in which direction. And what we all see here is more peaceful direction, Of course, there is still a lot has to be done, a lot has to be invested, efforts, resources, when it comes to the integration of Nagorno-Karabakh refugees into Armenian society, their inclusion into society, when it comes to the spreading out the peace narrative to the society, taking into account that it is a very sensitive time, it is still, the wounds are still fresh, people still feel that when we go back just 2 or 3 years ago, there were concerns that Azerbaijan will launch another attack against Armenia and open that so-called the narrative of Zangezur corridor, which they think is Sunni. So it was very, very tense back a few years ago. So compared with that, I think we have gone a long way ahead in terms of the more peaceful conditions. It's when we speak about something, it's good to compare with the recent history, with the recent experience. And if you make these comparisons, you see that there is some way that we have gone forward, and there is a commitment. There has been commitment on the Armenian side all the time, since at least 2020, to have peace with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, as a victorious country after 2020, they have been dictating some of the terms of this peace agreement, obviously, and in most occasions, Armenia had to give in, taking into account what would have been the alternative if there was resistance to peace, and resistant when it would come to perception that this is not a just peace. You will hardly find just peace based on the respect of human rights in any part of the world. If you explore and research some of the other peace processes and agreements, there are always people who will not be happy, unfortunately. There have been also instances when examples, if you look in the Middle East, Latin America, other places where those people who have not been happy, they didn't agree, and they even spoiled the entire peace processes. So what I'm trying to say that these small steps that have been undertaken, they are not irreversible. And people have to invest, every citizen in Armenia and international actors, they have a responsibility to build peace if they want to live in peace or achieve the peace they want to achieve through elections, for instance, through participation in policy making, through different many other ways, through NGO engagement, advocacy, so many other levels and layers. So there is a lot of work that has yet to be implemented. And but I think what I was trying to say is that hopefully we are moving toward a more peaceful region and more stable and long-lasting peace. It may sound not as just as perceived by among many in Armenia, especially, but we have to always take into account the alternatives where we will stand on by if there is no peace between the two countries, understanding the international politics, the global politics, international state of affairs, the changing world order, the might takes the rights, and so many other things that are also relevant to the course of global politics and to what we see in other parts of the world when territorial integrity is violated against the Charter of the UN, when borders are violated without the consent of the international community or the right for self-defense as accredited by the United Nations. So there are many events happening around us in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in other places, which we have to take into account and understand the reality of the changing world order, and the world generally changing, and where the small nations such as Armenia can try to become more viable, more able to establish good relations and ensure its own security. So I'll probably stop there. I didn't make much references to the history of Armenia or the culture of Armenia, but it's impossible to address everything in a matter of 20-25 minutes. But I'm happy to respond to any of your questions. And maybe also in the future, we will have other opportunities to engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Artak, for this informative talk. Thank you. So I would like to encourage the parents to type in any questions that they might have in the Q&A section, and we will share them with Artak. But until we have them, I hope it's okay for me to ask you a few questions. So you've described the situation of the country as quite complex, it's complicated. But what impact does it have on the daily life in Armenia? For somebody who lives here, because the parents probably only hear about Armenia on television, usually when there is some escalation of the conflict. But what does life look like on a daily basis, and what impact do these conditions have on us?
Thank you, Adam. That's a very, very interesting question, because if you want, basically on a daily daily lives, you can say there is no impact of that conflict. Honestly, even during the war in 2020 or in 2023, people living in Yerevan, they didn't stop living, in Yerevan and doing their everyday job, like going to the schools, going to the farms, going to the market, doing their own. The life was going on. Even if you walked out in the streets, you would see people out there sitting in the cafes even. So it was a different reality. There was a war going on, farther from Yerevan, obviously. But Armenia was, and then all of a sudden we see that the everyday lives are not that much impacted at first, when you look at it from the, at the first glance. But obviously it is impacting very much the decision making of the families, about their future. At the same time, while they're doing their everyday grocery shopping, people are thinking, so what's going to happen? Is it going to be the next move will be we are facing the war in Yerevan, or we will think about leaving the country because we don't want to live in this, or we are joining the army now. We are going to fight for their rights. Unfortunately, some of them losing their lives. So it's both. On the everyday, on the surface, you don't feel it, but nobody wants to speak about it. Whereas everyone, I'm more than sure, everybody is making their own, trying to understand. So what will be their reaction, their response? What should it be? Even if you don't see it in the change of the behavior in the everyday life, obviously it impacts it. And there are also figures and numbers that indicate how this has impacted the situation of war, of conflict, the mindset of people, the mentality. I already mentioned the migration flow has been, pretty significant since early days of independence in Armenia. When Armenia became independent in 1991, there was 3.5 million people living in Armenia. Now the number is slightly less than 3 million, or we have reached now the 3 million. But hundreds of thousands have left the country because of the uncertainty for the future. And even if the guns are not shooting, but there is no peace established, you still don't know what will happen in the future, and it impacts your everyday life. Maybe not at first glance, but certainly when it comes to the longer term decision making, understanding how you want to build your family based on what principles and in what country they are going to live, it does impact. But for Dilijan, for Yerevan, other places, we haven't witnessed any visible traces of war since early days of independence in 1990, since 1991. Even there was no war in Dilijan as such, has never been, fortunately, and in many other places of Armenia. So it was mostly around Nagorno-Karabakh, which is another territory which was never recognized by any state, neither by Armenia, but they had proclaimed their independence without recognition by anyone, not to mention even the United Nations, obviously. So the war was mostly there, but since 2020, it has also came to Armenia, but well, hopefully it has now been stopped and will not spread further.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. I would not be surprised if some of our parents were a bit surprised by how peaceful Armenia is and how safe it is at the moment, because you usually hear about violence on television. Peace doesn't sell so well, does it? But you already mentioned the events of September 2023, and some of our parents probably have heard about Ruben Vardanyan as the founder of the school and as also one of the people who were detained at that time and has been detained in Baku together with a few other Armenian people. If you could just briefly explain what happened to the parents.
Yeah, that's a very sensitive and emotional topic for many of us. In person, also seeing him in the school, it's very tough to realize now that he's in prison and in Azerbaijan. So what happened in 2023, unfortunately, Ruben Vardanyan is not the only person who was imprisoned, because when Azerbaijan started its operation in Nagorno-Karabakh, and it took about a little bit more than 1 day, the entire escalation and the war. In September 2023, they wanted to establish their rule. Azerbaijan decided to reclaim the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, as it was acknowledged by Armenians, because they claim that Nagorno-Karabakh is an integral part of Azerbaijan and was never recognized by any other country. So therefore, after 2020, the laws and the war in 2020, the Russian peacekeepers were introduced in Karabakh to ensure that Armenian population remains in Karabakh, lives in peaceful conditions, up until the point when there will be a solution found about their future. So what would be the future of Nagorno-Karabakh? Would it be an independent country, or would it be a part of a territory of Azerbaijan, but with an autonomy, and so on and so forth? So there were peacekeepers who were there to ensure their security. Unfortunately, they were not able to deliver, the Russian peacekeepers, because of many reasons, political reasons mostly, of also Russian engagement in Ukraine and the inability to also respond to the issues that they were responsible in other parts of the world. The situation developed in a way that Azerbaijan, having the upper hand, they initiated this military operation and were able to secure very quickly, because of this balance of military between them and Karabakh, they were able to quickly secure their presence in Nagorno-Karabakh. And unfortunately, what was remaining for the people is to leave, because nobody would imagine staying and living there under the rule of Azerbaijan, based on the history of conflict and the history of experience also that they knew from early 90s, and the narratives that Azerbaijan was spreading during the course of the 90s, 2000 and 2010s. So it was impossible to imagine how an ethnic Armenian would be able to continue living there securely, in security. And Ruben Vartan and a few others, the political and military leadership, were detained when trying to cross the border and enter Armenia. It was a selective approach of the Azerbaijani authorities. Unfortunately, we don't know on what grounds they were detained. Not only Mr. Vartan, but also other ex-former and incumbent political leadership of Nagorno-Karabakh, and a few others, civilians also, that are still in prison, 23, that we know about, the number of 23 people for sure, with names, with everything, that are still in the prison, unfortunately, all of them, and including Ruben Vartan. So that was the history, because Mr. Vartan was there in the role of a government official of Karabakh, and along with a few other members of the government and former presidents of Karabakh, he was detained by Azerbaijan, and the accusations that he is now has to respond to, it's public. Azerbaijan, we all know about these accusations. I don't want to repeat them, but what is saddening also that there is no international presence in the courts. It's also only conducted in the military court of Azerbaijan, the court hearings, and even the lawyers cannot have access to to defend the rights of the prisoners there. And it's even the international actors cannot access the courtroom or the hearings, just being present there. So this all leaves us a little hope for a just and fair outcome of the court hearings for Mr. Vartan and also others who are now standing trial in the courts in Azerbaijan. But this is the harsh reality. The government gives us assurances that they are trying hard without disclosing. They say it's a very sensitive topic, but it's on the agenda. One thing that they are also keep saying that with the peace agreement, there will be more opportunities for bringing Armenian detainees back to Armenia, because this will also create more legal grounds also for the return of some of the prisoners, and also hopefully all of the prisoners. So this is the context of the situation that we have. And again, yeah, it's a very, very sensitive topic for many in Armenia. We all hope that at some point, every Armenian, ethnic Armenian in Azerbaijan, all the prisoners will be released.
Okay, thank you. And we have two questions from parents. The first one is about the plan that was established in Washington a few weeks ago. When can we expect a specific roadmap to be established? Because at the moment we only have hopeful but declarations.
Yes. Do you want me to respond to this one? Okay.
Yes, please.
Yes. So we don't have any, we cannot say when the peace agreement will be signed. Again, I will repeat, the signing of the peace agreement is contingent upon the demand of Azerbaijan vis-à-vis Armenia to remove all perceived from their side, the perceived references to their territory when it comes to mentioning the unification of Karabakh of Armenia in the Declaration of Independence of Armenia, which is something that is referred in the Constitution of Armenia. So this is something they have already said on many occasions, that unless Armenia changes this, they will not sign the peace agreement. However, having said this, I think the initialing of the peace agreement and signing of the joint declaration with the presence of the president, the U.S. president, I think this gives us hopes that there are other tracks, not only the peace agreement, there are other tracks that will be taken forward. Again, I cannot provide any dates. These are long-term processes of border delimitation. This is the process of opening of the regional communications. When people start trading, when people start building the very first level of the trust and confidence of interaction, only then there will be more conviction that this can be taken forward. With small steps such as this one, signing the joint declaration and initialing the peace agreement, I think it is important to continue to expect changes in the near future. But I cannot say whether this will happen next year or the year followed after the next year, because this will also depend on the elections in Armenia next year in June, and also the process of the constitutional amendments and referendum that the government is committed to implement also next year. So depending on these developments, we can expect optimistically, like being very cautiously optimistic, maybe sometime next year, late next year or end of next year, some other movements when it comes to signing the peace agreement. But before that, there will be other steps undertaken. And by the way, right now we have senior US officials in Armenia to negotiate with the Armenian government on the possibility or the modality of the opening of the regional communication, of implementation, starting the design of the implementation of the Trump road of peace and prosperity. And they were in Azerbaijan 2 days ago. So these processes are going on in parallel, but let's be optimistic a little bit, hopeful also. Maybe at some point late next year there will be some progress over the signing of the peace agreement.
I see. And we have a follow-up question. So will TRIP belong to Armenia or Azerbaijan, or perhaps neither, because it will be built on land leased to the United States? And do you believe that it will benefit both countries equally?
We don't know the answer to that question. What I can say, what different parties speak about this. So the Armenian government says it's not a matter of leasing even. It's not a matter of, cannot be perceived as something not belonging to Armenia. The government of Armenia was very clear cut, which is also mentioned in the joint declaration, where TRIP is referred to, that the route and other regional communications, when they are opened, other roads, railways, etc., every country should be able and will be able to ensure that to whichever country these communication lines are going through will belong to that country, which means that territorial integrity, sovereignty, and jurisdiction of each country should be overwhelming. And this is mentioned in the agreement, that based on the principles, all the routes will be open and they will be functioning based on the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, inviolability of borders, reciprocity, and jurisdiction. So this is the 5 main principles that Armenia has agreed and Azerbaijan have agreed, which means if you interpret the route of TRIP also, the Trump route, that if it goes to Armenian territory, then Armenian authorities will ensure the security of the cargo and human traffic going through Armenian territory, and vice versa, reciprocal. On the other hand, we all heard the mentioning by Mr. Trump about the 99-year lease. It is mentioned nowhere in any of these declarations that were signed in Washington. And when Armenian senior government officials are asked about this 99-year lease, they say it's not true. It was just, it is not just true. And The government has yet to negotiate with the US counterparts on the modality of the operating of that route. So they deny that, despite Mr. Trump making this reference, they say it is not the case. We're still going to negotiate how to ensure Armenia's jurisdiction on that route in terms of when it comes to customs control, when it comes to border security. So they are going to negotiate with the Americans. I don't know how, but what the government says, that no Armenian territory can be even leased to any third country. But having said this, they also said they don't object to some development, infrastructure development projects that third countries can offer, including the United States, first and foremost, because they were there. They were given, this was Trump route, so the Americans were given the right to engage in infrastructure development, including in that section. So development is okay, then the roads or the investments can be made and built, but the infrastructure, according to Armenian law, will belong to the Republic of Armenia. Of course, the government also mentions the possibility of simplifying some of the measures when it comes to crossing the borders. For instance, digitalizing some of the border crossing checkpoints, or using artificial intelligence, or using other ways of control and security when it comes to border crossings. So it's a long way to go. It still have to be investments made, and to make sure that Armenia is able to utilize the up-to-date, very modern day technologies. But this is another way to approach. So there is no clarity when it comes to the final outlook of that route. Again, the government says it is Armenia's territory. Azerbaijan continues using the narrative of Zangezur corridor, which is very pro-Azerbaijani rhetoric, and the government is always irritated, government of Armenia, when they continue hearing this narrative coming from Azerbaijan, and they have to respond every time that it is being mentioned by Azerbaijan that it is not the case, provide assurances that it is not the case. And these assurances are not just baseless assurances. Obviously, if you look at the joint declaration, you will see that the main principles are articulated there, and therefore, which the principles that I already mentioned. And therefore, everything that will be implemented in the future will be based on these principles of, again, territorial integrity, sovereignty, jurisdiction, reciprocity, and border inviolability. So these are the main principles. Hopefully, both parties and also the Americans will stick to these agreements.
Okay, thank you. We also have a question about the role of Russia. It has always been an active player in the Caucasus, and it has already made negative statements about the plan to create the road that would be managed by the US. And that approach is supported by Iran as well. And how do you see the role of Russia in the current situation? What can they do? What can't they do anymore?
Yes, obviously Russia is a big neighbor. Russia and Armenia and the South Caucasus region in general have a long history of relationship. Since early in the 19th century, Russia was basically ruling these territories. There was no independent countries back then. In 20th century, only 2 years of independence, the three countries. But then there was also Soviet Union. So there was a long history, about 200 years of Russian dominance in this region, including over Armenia, the modern day Armenia. At the same time, obviously, there is still bilateral relationship between Armenia and Russia when it comes to security, when it comes to military cooperation, when it comes to economy and trade. Russia is #1 trade partner for Armenia, $6 billion of trade with export with Russia, trade with Russia between Armenia and Russia. Russia owns a lot of infrastructure in Armenia. Most importantly, let's not forget Russia has a military base in Gyumri in Armenia, about 3,000 soldiers and officers in the regiment there. Since Russia still remains also on some of the borders of Armenia, although the checkpoints are all now border checkpoints with Iran, with Russia, with Georgia, are now conducted by Armenian border guards, but Russia still also remains around the border areas of Armenia. So there is a long history, but we have to also understand that since 2022, Russia has been engaged in another conflict and war, waging a war in Ukraine, and they have been very busy there. I already made some references trying to explain that Russian influence is decreasing in our region, not to forget the events of 2023 and the inability of Russian peacekeepers to do anything there. So this is all related to part of a big picture, and the Russian role at this stage is decreasing, has decreased already, whereas the role of Turkey, the role of also nowadays we can talk also the United States is increasing. But Russia is not disappearing from this region, and if you ask Russians, they they will be remaining here. This is their what they call sphere of their influence, the near abroad. The mentality, imperialistic mentality, has not disappeared yet, and this post-colonial, neo-colonial mentality also goes on. And we will have to witness the Russian presence in Armenia. At the same time, Armenia is committed to more democratic route of development and building closer relationship with the European Union. At the same time, Armenia is party to a Eurasian Economic Union together with Russia and the other Central Asian republics and Belarus. So it will be very difficult for Armenia to change its foreign policy dramatically or drastically, because it will have repercussions, and nobody wants to spoil relations also with Russia. But what Armenian foreign policy is currently based on is a foreign policy of balancing and balanced foreign policy. So balancing relationship with the neighbors, with other neighbors, bringing on board other partners, continuing its dynamic relationship with Russia, but also trying to ensure that other partners will be engaged in the process of trade, economic development, and so on and so forth, also security. So lastly, when it comes to the I think you said the negative response by Russia when it comes to these announcements. I wouldn't say they was negative. They were quite neutral and also sometimes even cautiously optimistic. Some Russian officials sent mixed signals. Some said we'll have to wait and see how this all develops. Others said yes, but we certainly are still a player in this process. There is also some concerning elements in their narratives by saying that this will not, this will never materialize, these agreements, by saying that if we are not engaged there, nothing will eventually work out without us as Russians. But at the same time, they also understand the benefits. If these railroads are operated and built and operated, for instance, Russia can get access to Iran through Armenia, and this is something that they are very much interested in, this north-south corridor they already mentioned, because this will connect with railway with Russia to India. So India, Iran, with that section of the railway is unique, and through Azerbaijan you connect with Russia. So Russia, realistically speaking, and based on national interest, they will be interested also in this. It's another matter that they would want to have more dominant presence or even control some of these railways, which was the plan back in 2020 when this statement of ceasefire was signed, brokered by Russia. That was the plan for them to take part in this railway section of going through Armenia. But obviously a lot changed in their foreign policy and that in their relationship with other countries such as Ukraine. And the war in Ukraine has impacted also their presence in the South Caucasus, and not only South Caucasus, but also South Caucasus in a negative way. Therefore, they are still remaining. They want to remain as a major force. They will want to remain, whereas Armenia wants to diversify its partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The students who have just joined us will live here for 2 years, and you said that we should expect an election next year. What do you think will change, if anything? Do you think that we should expect a continuation of the current approach towards peace, or a change, or perhaps a drastic change?
Very good question. Yes, if you look at the political spectrum, opposition, government, etc., the ruling party, you will hardly find anyone saying that we don't want this peace. Some are saying we will probably revoke the peace agreement. We will negotiate a better peace agreement. Some of the opposition, radical opposition, are saying this. But others, they say they understand the reality. They say that we're fine with peace agenda, not the way the government presents, but for the peace, for building peace and relationship with the neighbors. But we will deliver better. We will bring better results for Armenia. When they are asked, so what exactly, what would you do differently? They are stuck. Nobody provides alternative. So maybe some will start already answering some of these questions, sensitive questions by the public, raised by the public approaching the elections. But so far, we haven't seen any well-grounded, evidence-based, an argument based on the current realities of world order, also international world order, that will be differently implemented when it comes to the peace agenda in Armenia. And another angle to this question is the public opinion polls. If you look at there are many, but if you look at some of the most trustworthy sources that I think are more trustworthy, you can see that the ratings of the ruling party still the highest, about 14 to 17% based on different public opinion polls, and they are the highest ranking political party. The others are well below, having 2 or 3%, some of the opposition figures. But what is interesting and intriguing for everyone to understand is that there is more than 40% of the undecided electorate right now in Armenia. So the ones who will be able to secure the votes of this undecided at this stage will win the elections next year. How things stand as of today, again, based on some of the numbers and based on the the narratives, I think the current government will be able to continue to remain in power based on today's figures and objective reality of the public opinion polls, even though these opinion polls are always also can be interpreted subjectively. And it's important to understand who is conducting these public polls. But again, as we speak, this is the picture. There is still some time to go, about around 10 months, and there are new parties being established in Armenia. Some are new, some are representing some of the old guards of the previous governments of Armenia, and it will be up to the people. Armenia is currently a democracy, and hopefully the democratic standards of elections also will not be sacrificed or endangered in next year. We believe so, that we are on the path of the solidifying our democratic institutions, and then whoever wins the elections, then it means that this is what public wants.
Mm-hmm. And how many political parties are there on the Armenian that count?
There are dozens. There are many officially established and on paper. But if you want a realistic figure, maybe up to 10 that will participate in elections in a way of forming alliances, maybe, or competing even as political parties among between each other. So yeah, that's realistically speaking, maybe 10, 12 parties, maybe some of them forming some alliances to attract more points. But yeah, but if you take on paper, it will be maybe more than 70 parties on paper. Again, some of these parties, even the most competitive ones, are one-man parties, or a few people. We don't. Unfortunately, we're not there yet when it comes to parliamentary democracy, because Armenian constitution we introduced the new constitution in 2015, and which entered into force in 2018. And since then, we are only parliamentary republic, and we have only political parties participating in the elections. In the past, we were a semi-presidential republic, and the presidential elections were the most important. So it was about leaders, it was about personalities, and it still continues to be represented in the parties now, but it is still mostly personalities who dictate the political agendas within their own parties. Unfortunately, we have only maybe 2 or 3, parties that we can say that they have long they have been around for a long time, and they know, they have been going through different elements of party, building the political parties from within, from inside, and so on and so forth. But let's see whether we will have new parties for the next election. Parties that newly established parties who will possibly attract some of the votes of people.
Yeah, well, it sounds like challenges that a lot of democracies face on a daily basis, and often well-established democracies too. So as we approach the end of our webinar, I'd like to end it with a little more perhaps personal questions. You've talked about the complexity of the geopolitical situation in Armenia. We also said that when we hear about Armenia on the international news, it's about the escalation of the conflict most of the time. But there's so much more to Armenia than that. It's a rapidly developing country when you look at the IT sector, or when you look at the developing tourism. What would you like the world to know about Armenia? A part of the conflict and your personal interest in conflict resolution and peace building.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I think, yes, it would have been better if I had thought about this a little bit, but no, I'm kidding. Of course, tourism is booming in Armenia. Increasingly so. If you compare the figures from last year, even there is, the percentages are going up and up, and there are so many other flights that are operated by different countries flying to Armenia, and this is all great, because I think indeed not many people know what Armenia represents. Usually it is about war and conflict. Hopefully it will change it, and it will be more about peace and how to build peace, how to establish and build peace in Armenia. But what I want to say is that indeed there is so much more in Armenia than conflicts and wars, and that people are surprised when they are visiting Armenia. Always, that's my experience when I interact with the people around, and I think this is the advantage of Armenia, to opening up, and with peace also there will be more opportunities to cross the border through Turkey to come to Armenia, for instance. For the first as a first step. With Azerbaijan, it's a longer story, but Turkey is next door to Europe, and this will bring more Europeans and people living in Europe and in the West to Armenia. So there is a lot to be proud of Armenia. I could have probably also mentioned the Armenian cuisine. I could have mentioned Armenian culture. That since ages, Armenia being the first to adopt Christianity as a state religion, although there are also elements of different other religions in Armenia, obviously. Armenia is in the crossroads. If you go back to the history, it's at the crossroads of East and West, South and North. And this is true for every matter, for culture. So Armenian language has many reflections from Turkish language, Arabic language, Russian language, Iranian, Farsi. So, and obviously Armenian alphabet is one of the unique alphabets that only Armenian language is based on. So it's a specific family of languages. Armenian language also something very difficult, but still I know some people, especially from Russians who have been arriving to Armenia because of the recent political events. I know some Russians that have learned Armenia and are now easily speaking or communicating in Armenian. So there is much more to talk about Armenia. Maybe some other time I will be more prepared to present Armenia from a different angle.
No, I think that's a wonderful answer. I think that's great. And then finally, we live in interesting times, but we also live in times of when almost whenever you look at what's on the news, you hear about a new conflict. And I would be very curious to hear from you, as somebody who has had a career in conflict resolution and peace building. How do you stay hopeful and motivated? Perhaps we can learn something from you.
Oh, Adam, you're pushing the most sensitive elements there, because you're right. It's very disappointing and frustrating at times because of the lack of progress, lack of achievements. But I have, personally, I have built my own way of dealing with this, of being as realistic as possible. and staying as calm as possible, trying to get as much information as possible in order to inform myself. So what is all going on, and prepare myself to respond to the to the escalation, to the wars, etc. So it's about informing myself, educating myself, working in the field, trying to achieve little changes in the minds of people. For instance, when it comes to teaching or interacting with young people and others, when you see the changes happening in their minds, even though this change is not big, even though this is not impacting the fate of the country, but with these smaller steps gives me hope that I'm doing the right job, that I'm working in the right directions. Because every person that is thinking differently, critically, the critical thinking, or thinking critically and then behaving differently, and then changing its behavior, their behavior, and trying to understand so what they themselves can invest in this process. I think this is how this is why I continue for so many years to be involved in the world of conflicts and wars mostly. Hopefully in the near future also we can also refer to history of peace in our region.
Okay, thank you so much, Artak, for spending this hour with us. We're very grateful for that, and thank you for sharing your insights with us into Armenia's recent history and the current state of affairs. It is like everywhere, I think, in the world, possibly challenging place to live in, but also a great opportunity, I think, for the students that come here from all over the world to see how peace is made almost in front of their own eyes. So thank you very much for giving us these insights. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This webinar has been recorded, like all our webinars, and it will be shared with the parents shortly on our website. So thank you very much, and we look forward
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and for the for your moderation and questions, and the questions raised by others also. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Goodbye.